All right, welcome to the NYU Game Center. I am Eric Zimmerman. I'm one of the faculty here at the NYU Game Center, and I'm here to welcome you to Strategy Guide, Breaking into the Game Industry. We have a great event tonight, both this and afterwards. We're going to tell you about that in just a second. But before we do that, I want to thank our sponsors. They are incredibly awesome local game development companies that help fund this whole event series. So let's give a big round of applause to Avalanche, Take-Two, Fresh Planet, and Play Dots. Thank you. All local game development companies. What's going to happen tonight? Well, in a few moments, we're bringing out onto the stage some panelists to talk about the subject of tonight, breaking into the game industry. And we, in addition, are going to have a lot of Q&A with you guys as well. Following that, the IGDA, International Game Developers Association, has organized a whole event around the game industry and getting a career in the game industry. And let's welcome Jess Haskins, the local chair of the local chapter, co-chair of the local chapter, to tell us all about it. Jess Haskins.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I'm Jess Haskins, co-chair of the IGDA NYC chapter, which, if you haven't heard of us, we're the local chapter of the International Game Developers Association. We rebooted the chapter last summer. We're having more events. Our group, our social media presence is expanding. We have a newsletter which you should check out. We include lots of things like local events like this one and job listings that come every month. So go to igda.org/NYC to find out all about that. Tonight we're bringing back a few things that we did at actually last year at NYU at the Games and Digital Media Career Fair. We did resume and portfolio reviews, which are going to be over here. We have some people who have graciously volunteered their time to come if you have portfolio, if you have your resumes with you, or even if you just want to do like a mock interview or have some questions for tips and advice. These people will be here. They'll have little nameplates you can see for different disciplines. If you're looking for advice in like design or programming or art, QA, they'll be all lined up here after the panel. We'll also have some discussion rooms that are going to be just back here, and that's some of the members of the panel, and some additional people will be back there for more like roundtable type discussions or one-on-one. If you have questions about things that came up in the panel, or just sort of want to have that like one-on-one consultation, stop by the discussion rooms back there. We'll also have those broken up by category, again, if you're looking for programming or production advice. Thanks all for coming, and please feel free to take advantage of the people who have graciously volunteered their time here. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Awesome. I don't think you've ever had this sort of, it's like a spa treatment for your game industry career. It's just all of these sort of events happening all throughout the evening. So I'm really, really excited about that. Just a few words about the Game Center. We are a department at NYU. We are the Department of Game Design and Tisch School of the Arts. And we have events throughout the year, especially during the academic year, September to May. A week ago, we had an amazing Global Game Jam site. Anybody here went to the Global Game Jam? Yes? Awesome, yeah. Okay, hands, no applause. I think I played that one wrong. Anyway, a lot of you in the crowd. 2 weeks from tonight, I think we were the largest North American site? Yeah. And we're in the top 10 of the world every year, right here. So, what's that? 6. Oh, number 6, right. Los Angeles. I think they beat us by one person in the end. No, all right. Gwynna wants the voting recount, I think, on that one. The other thing is 2 weeks from tonight, our faculty member Naomi Clark, a game designer who creates amazing work on and off the computer, is going to be talking about taste in games as part of our lecture series. If you want to hear about all of this stuff happening week to week at the Game Center, get on our mailing list, gamecenter.nyu.edu. Otherwise, let's get started. So let's bring out our panelists. Let's come out and sit down, everybody. Let's welcome them to the stage. Yes, and I will introduce them for you. I guess we're having that's all right. Yes, wherever you landed is good. So you're they're not in order. That's okay. That's my fault. I didn't really plan this out. But let me introduce them. So here on my immediate right, from your point of view, is Amanda Cosmos, who's a QA lead at Dots, and before that worked at Irrational Games, coming to us from Boston. Shervin, I think your name is spelled wrong on here, isn't it? Yeah, it is definitely spelled wrong. I'm tempted to just correct that.
Just call me Shervin. I'm cool with
Yeah,
that.
that's okay. No, that's an unacceptable typo. All right, there you go, Shervin. So Shervin, on the other side of the stage, is one of our recent graduates from the very first class of NYU MFA students, and he is at Digital Extremes in London, Ontario. Thank you for coming, Shervin. Nice to have you here. Did you get a little polite applause as well? No? All right, thank you. Yes, absolutely. So Tom is coming to us from Arkadium. Arkadium is possibly the longest running game development studio in New York City, right? Dedicated to games. I think it's what?
Pretty close. 15?
15 years or so. So Arkadium does mostly online games, now smartphones as well. Has studios not just in New York City, but around the world. We're really happy to have you here. Welcome, Tom. Thank you very much for coming. Maria St. Martin is another graduate, slightly more recent than Shervin. You just graduated in May, right? Yeah. So during that time, you had a 6-month internship at Disney Studios, and now you are at Avalanche, which is one of the few AAA game development studios here in New York City. So really happy to have you here, Maria. Thank you for coming. And lastly, Joe, they're in alphabetical order of their last names, so that's if you're wondering what the order is. Joe is one of our veteran developers on the panel. He is co-founder of Fifth Cell, mostly known for the Scribble Knot series. Joe just opened a small office here in New York City. We're really excited to have Fifth Cell here. Let's welcome Joe to the panel. Thanks, Joe. Also, as you can see, we have an incredible range here. We have people that are recent graduates, people at different levels in the industry, studio heads. So that's really intentional. That's what we're all about tonight. Also, I also want to mention, I was just told that 2 of our panelists are recent parents, like meaning within the last few weeks. So if you see Joe or Tom falling asleep on their stools, none of us will take it personally. They're here. We really appreciate you coming despite your busy schedule. So how's this thing going to work? Well, in preparing for this panel, if you've ever been to one of these annual Breaking In strategy guide sessions before, you know that I ask the panelists all 2 questions in advance. And the first questions are, what do you think are the top myths about breaking into the game industry? What are the things that newbies don't understand about what it means to work in games? And none of us want to be there, right? None of us want to be that newbie walking into a job interview with misconceptions about how the game industry works. So I think this is really important. And the other thing is, what do you look for when you're hiring someone? Some of the people on the panel are actually doing direct hiring. Other people are having input on their colleagues or recently have gone through a hiring process. So what do they think is important when you are a new person entering the game industry? For me, these 2 questions really bring out a lot of the really core issues that face us when we're talking about what it means to break into the game industry. So what we're going to do is go through their answers, and we're just going to have some discussion. If there are questions that come up, this is very informal, feel free to raise your hand. I also have encouraged our panelists to disagree with each other, right? There's not one right answer to all of these things. There's not one silver bullet. Oh, this is the secret knowledge that, that's going to get you in. They work at very different kinds of companies, and sometimes something that works in one place or in one context isn't going to work somewhere else or isn't true somewhere else. So I'm hoping that we're going to have a lively discussion about all of these. So let's start by talking about the myths. What are the myths about working in the game industry that people just don't understand? So first, we're going to go through myths about how to get a job. So this came up a lot from our panel, and one of the myths was you need connections. Maria, this was yours, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? What did you mean? You think that everybody thinks, oh, without deep connections, I can't get a job?
I think many people think that. In my experience, obviously connections always help, so do try to get them, but it's not the only thing. So in my experience, what has got me jobs has basically been my work. Just knowing how to showcase it and
Your work meaning your portfolio and that kind of
being
thing.
my portfolio and the things I have done and the cover letters that I've done. I've got a lot of jobs without knowing anyone in the company. Well, not a lot. Like most of my jobs, it's been like that. So yes, they're helpful, but you don't need connections to get in.
Do you,
So-
panelists, do you agree? I mean, in my mind, having a connection increases your chances by like 100 or 1,000.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add that what it kind of does is it eliminates that first step. And especially for students, like our recent graduates, like the first step is always the hardest step because like your resume looks like everybody else's resume because everyone's going to the same schools, getting the same degrees. So, if somebody vouches for you or they're like, oh, like, I know this person or, I think it helps out a lot. And then I'd say like the biggest advantage to knowing somebody in the industry is like that sort of like the personality, attitude, like work ethic sort of test that like, you can look at somebody's portfolio, you can even interview them, but like you can't really tell what type of employee they're going to be. And so if somebody's worked with somebody before and they refer them, they're like, hey, I worked with this person. I know that they work hard, they work smart. This is what they contributed to, this is what they've done. This is like out of this portfolio video, this is what they actually contributed to it. And, that kind of like, can give you a little bit of an advantage.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
Connections won't get you the job, but they'll let you hear about more jobs. There are a lot of jobs I've seen or pings that they aren't even listed initially, or people will even like make jobs for you or vouch for you saying, oh, I know this person. We're thinking about looking for a systems designer. We were talking about it. Oh, I just got approval. Do you want to put your resume in? And that usually will get you a head start.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is connections basically gets you in the door, or they get your out of the stack of 1,000 resumes that come in, you might end up in the stack of 10 or 15 or 20 that they're going to look at closely, but they won't get you the job, which I think was Maria's point. So let's look at this one. So a couple of you, Maria and Shervin, you both made this point that designers don't code. That's a myth. You guys really feel that everybody needs technical skills. Let me ask the people on the panel, how many people at your company are developers, meaning they are doing day-to-day production work in your studio, but they don't have technical skills? They're a pure game designer or sort of an art person who's not doing hardcore production. Are there people like that at all at Arkadium, for example, or at Dots or FitCell?
None of our designers or engineers.
None of them. So you separate game design from engineers. Okay.
We definitely, expect that our designers do, basic scripting and stuff like that in terms of being able to get involved, actually engage with the team, design levels, test them out. We don't do a lot of like big document writing.
Okay.
This is
So,
dangerous.
all right. So, but Maria and Shervin, what did you guys mean by that?
Stay away from that one.
Maria and Shervin, what did you guys
Well, in my experience, designers do code, but not shippable code. They code for prototyping, but a lot of designers don't know how to code and they still get jobs. But if you do know how to code, it's way easier to get a job. At least something.
Right. Shervin, I think your title is technical designer, right?
Yeah,
So you're the embodiment of the intersection here, right?
So yeah, DE, it's at the very lowest level, our designers all know how to do scripting within our own in-house engine. And basically, if you have an idea for something as a designer, you have to prototype it yourself. And how good you are as a programmer is going to limit how kind of or how big your concepts or ideas can be. And our designers range from, like Maria said, people who at least know how to script at the lowest level, and then full on, almost I'll call them gameplay engineers or tech designers like me who have a formal CS degree, and we're interacting with both engineer and design departments every day.
Amanda, did you want to add on to that?
I'm finding now that I'm at Dots, which is more startup-y than AAA Irrational, a lot of the designers or people who are called designers will pretty much be straight-up programmers, but they do design as well. So they can do prototypes and initial like pre-production stuff, and it's very impressive.
I think team size has a lot to do with it too.
Yeah.
Like the smaller the group, the more you have to be like kind of being able to do everything, and then the bigger the group, the more you can kind of relax on the engineers to kind of be able to help you build everything with their own engine.
Yeah, we're going to come back to this issue when we talk about skills and what you need to get a job. I think that, I will say that for myself, I'm not a programmer, but I worked for, 20-something years in the game industry, so it's as a game designer, right? More of a pure game designer, so it's possible. Let's move on. You don't need a portfolio. So a couple of you said this. Do people really think you don't need a portfolio? Is that really a myth that people have? Shervin and Maria, both of you listed this, so more than one of you did. Are people thinking I just show up with a degree?
Well, we have people. It's kind of actually the exact opposite. I definitely don't think I put this down, because the one thing we do at our work is when we're looking at candidates for design positions or even engineering positions, we make sure we look at the work you've done, because it kind of showcases how much of a self-starter you are.
You're right. You put professional experience always trumps personal portfolio work. So your myth is about a portfolio, but it's kind of the opposite. You're saying that the portfolio is more important than you.
Yeah,
think.
We have a lot of people who've come in. I've seen the resumes themselves of people who have professional game development experience, and then it turns out, just because of the nature of how the interviews work, they were up against candidates who had a lot of personal portfolio work, and they were viewed equally in the kind of interview room, right? Like. It does, just because you have 3 to 5 years of experience, it's certainly really helpful, but it's not the end all be all. Like, there's more to it than just the experience.
Tom, I think you wanted to talk about this.
Yeah, I would totally disagree with this one.
Great.
Because, and when we look at people, I always want to see what they've done. I mean, I learned so much more from a little sort of hairy prototype about the way they think about games, the way they, recognize problems and sort of solve them, than I do from a whole lot of writing about what you've done or anything.
Also, don't be ashamed of your work, because I remember being on a forum and for a video game, like getting into the industry, and a guy responded saying, I made Gnarls Barkley Shut Up and Jam Gaiden, and I'm afraid of putting this on my resume. And I'm thinking, like, if you told me you put that, I would like vouch for you, and any of my designers at my work would love you. Like, they love that game. So don't be ashamed.
All right, let's move on. We're going to go to another category about myths about how games get made, right? Really understanding how the game industry works and what it means. This one I thought was super interesting, and I have to say that in part because we have not had this in last year's. This is about the 3rd or 4th year I think we've done this, and we have not had this myth before, and it's about this myth that developers are auteurs, right? In some way, and this is the myth that 4 out of 5 of you listed some version of this. The idea that that design is about individuals, that I myself am going to influence game design, ideas come from only the design department, or making a successful game is all about having a great idea. So in some form or another, almost all of you said that. I think it's fascinating, because I think it's maybe the rise of indie games, right? Now you have people going through school who, from the very beginnings of them being a gamer, they have this idea of an indie game auteur, which is different than maybe 10 years ago in the game industry. But I'd really love for some of you to talk about this. Why is this a myth, and why is this a problem? Is it a problem that people have this idea? And what's the correct way of thinking about individual authorship and the game industry? Because the last thing people want to show up is to an interview and be like be sort of like a naive prince or princess thinking, oh, well, you're gonna hire me for my genius ideas, and other people are gonna execute it.
Well, I think the best idea should win. And, sometimes the best ideas come from, your lead designer. Sometimes the best ideas come from your QA lead. Like, I think that I would disagree. I think you mentioned that, that good ideas aren't, you said something about like good ideas not being important, or the idea, right, or something. And like, that's, we're totally, our studio is built around ideas. And so It's like, if your core concept, if you can't tell me, put it on paper, sell me on what you're making, like just verbally or written, probably not going to turn out to be that great of a game.
Tom, that was you, I think. You said there's a myth that people think that all you need is a great idea and a programmer, right? What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think there were several different threads to this thought.
Yes.
But I do think the rise of indie games has this idea that there's one guy who came up with this brilliant idea, and then now it's making millions of dollars in the market. And as far as I know, like, there are things we could point to that are that, but that is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what successful games look like.
So what actually happens? Let's. A lot of people in the audience haven't worked in the game industry. So what is if that's not the way it works, how does it work? If we're going to generalize.
Well, I mean, I guess it kind of depends on what you're making.
Right.
Like, I mean, so for an indie, I would say that it really kind of is maybe it's not one person, but it's 1, 2, 3 people who, have a great idea and they execute on that idea, and then it catches on in the marketplace. I'd say for commercial games, like they're much more expensive, they're bigger teams, you have, departments with unique, responsibilities, you sometimes publishers, sometimes you're working on sequels, there's just a lot more constraints. Whereas in indie, like, the exciting thing about being an indie is like you can come up with an awesome idea and, you could be the next Notch or, you could be, the next Genova or whatever, so.
I just worry about that thought process. Like I have a young game designer on my team who's like comes to me and like points out like, this game, look at it. It's like this tiny thing that this guy made. He made all this money. And it's like a statistical fallacy that yes, there's that guy, but you don't see the 100,000 indie games made by one guy in a basement that totally failed. And you have to recognize that if you're going into that space, it's a very, very challenging space, and it's much,
Yeah, I'll agree to that. I think the other thing also is that when you're in a professional work environment, there's a lot more kind of buy-in that you need when you have ideas. And if you come in with the kind of, this is my idea, this is my, my baby, so to speak, it's a lot harder to get buy-in from everyone else when you're trying to just make the best thing. And that's assuming that you think that your idea is the best, right? Like people will come to our design departments all the time from QA, from sound, from even just from traditional playtesters, and we take their ideas very seriously because if the idea is the best idea, then the next step is prototyping it and getting buy-in from everyone else on the team.
All right, so what I'm hearing is that ideas are important, and you want people that are creative, but you want people to understand that if you're working at a company, especially one that's more than a few people, it's not about one person and a great idea. It's about working with a team and understanding a larger process.
Yeah, I just have one thing to add, which is like in my interview process, they reiterated that the most important thing they're looking for is fit for the company. So, I mean, you can be super talented, but if you don't know how to work with other people, they're probably not going to hire you.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get to that. The collaboration was a huge agreement as well. Let's get through some of these myths. Gamers make great developers. Tom, this was you. Do you? So people have an idea that just because I'm a tournament fighting game or Magic game player, therefore I. Whoa, we're right here. Yeah, we may have some in our audience. Do you want to elaborate?
I just, I don't think. I think there's it's not like being a great gamer is going to not make you a great developer of games, but especially at Arkadium, because we do a lot of casual games. We develop one of our big clients is AARP. You want to understand how your user, is going to be different than you a lot of the time, and that's great. And you want to be able to understand, like put yourself in their head, understand what's going to make them happy, what are their reasons for playing your game, and then play to those strengths, which is very often not going to be the exact game that you play all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that I think it's critical for designers to be gamers, to play a lot of games. Like even if you don't pick one game and literally spend all the time with it, to actually try. We always encourage all our designers to, we have a big game library at FifthCell, and it's play the most popular games, both the commercially popular games and the critically popular games, and sort of know what they're doing. It's also a good way to sort of stay in tune with what the market is after. Like the game market changes, yearly. So I think it's real important for at least designers to, be, pretty diligent gamers.
All right, and so for the unicorns in the audience, who are great gamers and great developers, we welcome you here. We're not trying to exclude you. So Amanda, this one was kind of funny. A myth that everyone knows what they're doing. I think you said straight out. Once you get there, you realize what is it? You think that it's some kind of robotic corporation where everyone has a role, but actually it's what once you get there.
Yeah, so when I started at Turbine, which is a company that's been around for 15 years, they kind of had their processes. They knew how to make MMOs. They use that same process with other MMOs. They might implement sprints, but they're still getting the same work done. And then when I went to Irrational, and we were in pre-production for BioShock Infinite, and I was watching all the systems for getting the game out changing around me, because it was such a big game, and and a lot of them hadn't worked on the original BioShock, and we were working on a new console with a new engine, so it was just very shocking to me, oh, we're trying to all figure this out together. Okay.
So people should be ready to.
You should be ready to be agile and contribute feedback on the system.
Shervin, you had a little bit about this too, right? That your job title, what you get hired for, may change as you work at the company, right?
Yeah, at DE, especially working on Warframe or working on other projects, Warframe is like a living online game that's been out for over 2 years now, and the game has changed so radically that what you end up working on also changes radically with you. Or with the game, sorry. So, and also everybody knows what they're doing. It's just really funny because when you're making a living, breathing game like an MMO or something, it feels like everything's on fire all the time. And the funny thing is that when I had finished my MFA degree, I was kind of getting ready to go to like a traditional software job where everything is regimented and we have requirements. And then you come in and the whole building's on fire and your entire job is just trying to fix everything as quickly as you can. And you just have to learn to like kind of embrace that craziness, I guess.
Yeah, I just had one thing to add. Just having been in the industry for a really long time, Arkadium. This is one thing I love about games, and I think probably you should come to love this too. The industry changes constantly. Like every 2 years, it's another thing that's super huge. Like when I started, it was like, oh my gosh, like women play games. And like that was huge news. And then there was the Wii, and then there was Facebook games, and then now there are mobile games. There were downloadable games for a while. Like every 2 years there's just total revolutions constantly, and so you're always adapting, and that sort of flexible attitude is hugely important.
Cool. So lastly in this category, about how games get made, people know what QA means. And Amanda, I have to say, we're so lucky to have you here because QA is a lot of the way that people think, oh, I'm going to enter the industry, starting in QA and testing. And you had a couple myths here that first, that play testing is the same as QA, and also that
I would actually see that. I'm gonna drag game schools. I actually would get a lot of applicants coming in from game schools, and they're like, we'd ask them their QA process for their final projects, and they'd be like, oh, we go to the other teams and we have them play our game and we ask them what they like and didn't like. And I'm like, no, like they're not, and it's not their fault because they're not being taught that there's actually a regimen and structure. Like I even, my friend's teaching at MIT, he sat me down for dinner to help me, to get me to tell him what it's actually like so he can tell his students. So yeah, it's like it's not their fault that they don't really, because a lot of the academics haven't worked in studios, so they haven't worked with QA departments. But yeah, it was detrimental to them coming in, the students coming in. I would rather hire someone who used to be a food server who could tell me about a bug that they thought they saw in a Shogun UI versus a kid who I'm going to have to try to fix his perception of what QA even is.
Interesting. I will say, in defense of the NYU Game Center, we have a class called Games and Players that's open to grads and undergrads, and it does focus specifically on QA methodologies.
Good.
So playtesting methodologies. For those of you choosing your courses for next semester. Let's go on. So the final set of myths before we get to what people look for in developers is myths about day-to-day work. So one of them is that you get to have fun every day, right? You're playing every day, and Joe, I think you said something like, I get to decide what I'm going to do every day, and I guess that's not something that you should expect while you're at games.
Yeah, and I think it's, we hire out of schools sometimes, and I think that's kind of the biggest hurdle is students who are used to the student projects where they're collaborating and they're deciding kind of what they're taking. There's usually enough interesting things to do in a student project that like everybody gets to do something somewhat fun. And then when you go, especially if you're going to a bigger company, working on a bigger game, you might get stuck on something that you think is just really boring for a really long time. And so, it's just got to put in the hours.
Yeah, but it's interesting because the other myth is that it's sort of the opposite, right? And you also commented on this, so that the idea that crunch is better, and that it's not really the opposite, but it's kind of a different take on the idea of what it means work. So you think people coming in thinking that crunch is good and it's going to help make a good game?
I just think there's this I don't know what it would be, like a perception among people getting into the industry that though if I prove myself by staying at the office till 11 o'clock at night, people are going to think that I'm, a better worker or more dedicated or whatever. And then, game studios, they don't do anything to help alleviate that. They'll let you stay there and work. So, but I think that what we've seen is people dislike it. And not just dislike it, but there's a measurable decrease in the quality of code design from people who are there consistently late. And so, I would, it's like when you just get started, like you always want to work hard, you always want to prove yourself, and our industry requires extra hours sometimes, but like I wouldn't go in with the mentality of like, I'm going to go and my life is going to be work for the next couple of years, and also remember that if you set that up as the perception, then when you decide, to basically you don't want to do that anymore, it's going to look like, oh, this person's, why are they slacking? Why aren't they putting in, 9, 10, 15 hours a day anymore? And you're like, well, I should never have done that in the first place.
And like just to kind of jump off that, like if you're working on any game that isn't like a traditional box product that you ship and you finish, like you see burnout really, really quickly, and that's something that like DE switching to like a free-to-play game market has had to learn how to kind of treat it like a marathon and not like a significant sprint to the finish. And on my team especially, like you kind of get chided if you work too hard in a weird way because they're expecting you to perform more smarter than harder. You should try to, efficiency is kind of the biggest deal, not just raw horsepower of how hard or how long you stay in the office, because it makes everyone else kind of look bad, like, oh, why is this guy staying so late when we're all going home at 4 or 5 o'clock, right? There's a kind of social pressure there too. And it works out in a good way because it makes everyone have a balanced life as opposed to staying till 11 every night.
I know. I think there's probably compared to New York City and some of the expectations in the media industry here, not just games, but advertising or television, film, Canada, I think, is like a completely different country, right? It's a European quality of life over there. So that's something to think about too. Amanda, I think you wanted to jump in.
It was very concerning to me when I had brand new testers and they would come in and be excited when the first crunch hit because they felt it was like a rite of passage. And I would be so sad and then watch that drain out of them after 3 months. But yeah, it shouldn't be something that you expect, and it means something's messed up, and also the drain on resources, because if programmers are staying till 3 a.m. to fix a bug, they're probably not fixing it properly, and then the testers have to stay late to hit that code and make sure, and then they find it's not fixed properly, and then the programmer's frustrated. Like it goes down and down and down, and it's like a Sisyphean task, like the ball rolling.
Go ahead.
One quick thing is we lose a lot of people after 30 in our industry, like the burnout. It's like you're just graduate from school and it's like exciting and everything, but I mean I see all the time engineers, and you're losing the talent. It's like our industry is worse off because people feel like they need to put in so much time, and then they get to a point in their life where they're like, I love games, but like I just can't do this anymore. I'm just going to go work at a bank. And for game developers that need talented people with that perspective and the experience of shipping games, like it's hard. And so I'd say it's definitely a big negative.
Well, what's awesome is that we're getting consensus here from everyone that crunch is not desirable. But again, the benefit for the audience is they don't know that much about the game industry. Maybe they haven't worked in it as much. So let's just reconcile these two things. So on the one hand, you're saying, no, it's a myth that you get to have fun every day, but it's also a myth that crunch is constant. So what you're saying is that in a good studio, you're not being overworked, but you're also not necessarily doing what you want every day. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, I mean, doing what you want, I mean, it's relative. It's like, do you maybe some people love doing UI programming. Maybe some people love, just A/B testing.
Well, I always like to say if there's always shit shoveling work in every job, right? I mean, like the boring grind. But and if you can love that shit shoveling work,
but I think
then you know that you found your
and my
calling,
definition
right?
of a good employee is somebody that can find the value in that. Is just like, don't look at it that way, being like this. There's no glamour in this. It's like, well, if you're doing it, it's important. It's like we don't pay you to do something that doesn't matter, because then we wouldn't pay you. So it really, everything that goes into making a game matters. And I'd say it's like every other industry, you got to put the time in. If you're an entry-level programmer, entry-level designer, it's like the stuff you're working on is going to matter, it's going to be important, and if you prove yourself on that, eventually, you will get to have more choice in kind of what you do. And I say this is more for bigger companies. Smaller companies, indie companies, like everybody does everything, all the time. So.
All right, final word on this one.
I was actually going to recommend that everyone does the shit shoveling work, because you end up looking like a hero at work because no one else wants to do it. And the reality is that when you end up making friends really fast, when animators, for example, will come to you and say, oh, I need our engine to do this, and you go and you put it in, all of a sudden 6 to 7 animators all know your name and they're all going to come to you. It's a quick way to kind of build your rep if if that's what you're trying to do when you start a job somewhere. So don't turn away from it. In fact, kind of embrace the stuff that no one else wants to do.
Shervin, game in the office politics. Love it. So let's the final myth. Your game will be a hit. Tom, you talked about this, I think, already. The idea that the hit is the exception, not the rule. Let me ask a question. I want our panelists to think about maybe less Maria and Shervin. You've been in the industry less, but of all the games that you or your studio have done, what percentage do you think has actually been a real hit, a bona fide hit? Of all the games that your studio has done, counting all the titles or that you've been involved with over the course of your career, how many is I'm going to give you successive numbers, less than 50%? Yes, raise your hand, yes? No?
I'd say 50.
Oh, 50 for you, Tom?
Probably less than 50.
Less than 50?
I'm a bad example because all my games I've worked on are really.
Oh, wow. All right. So maybe what would you say it is for you, Tom?
I don't know, 35, 40. I mean, we do a lot of small web games. I also we do a lot of like smaller games, small mobile games, small web games, Facebook games. I also ran the R&D department for a while, so I'm very used to putting out lots and lots of products. And because I think that's really the central to actually getting a hit is keep trying.
Cool.
Well, I'm a bad example because all the games I've worked on were for many years, like working on an MMO, like Lord of the Rings
right.
Online, work on that for 2 years, same game. Work on Bioshock Infinite, 3.5 years, same game. And then now I'm at Dots, and Dots is a hit. So
Right, that's true. So
I've been pretty lucky. I didn't have to work on like Hasbro games and stuff.
Anyone from Hasbro in the audience?
They're from Pawtucket.
Yeah, I think that, but I think it's also interesting that it also reveals something about the difference in the sectors of the industry too, right? That we're all working in different numbers of games and different ideas of what a hit is.
I think it speaks to the same thing. There's something really interesting in this industry about the hit game. The hit game, the Dots, most likely came out of a lot of prototyping, or else they got super duper lucky. And then once that hit shows up, and there are these amazing positive feedback loops around that hit that keep it running, and then you hire people and you put them in that space to like keep the users engaged.
Right.
So there exist a lot of games that are very successful, but they came out of a lot of games that are totally forgotten.
All right, let's move on to the second part of our discussion now. Not the myths about the industry, but I think more maybe what some people in the audience really want to hear about. What are you looking for, or what do you think your studio is looking for when you're hiring someone, when you're bringing somebody on? So I divided your answers in these into a few categories too. Looking for the right personality. I'm just going to put all the answers up there at once. This is sort of what the consensus was in terms of all of these, and at least more than one of you mentioned these all in some way or another. But I have to say that the first one, the number one, positive collaborator, someone with the right attitude, who's a team player, good relationship with your peers, collaborative attitude, not a big ego. That was mentioned by almost, I think 4 out of 5 of you mentioned that. I only let you mention 5 things. So, does anyone want to comment on any of these? We don't have to go in order. Just Maria, do you want to talk about that, being a collaborator, or some of your answers on these?
I don't think I wrote any of these answers.
Yeah, you actually did. You wrote the collaborator. You have a good relationship with your peers.
Oh, okay. Well,
never burn
that's
bridges,
true.
right?
You do need to have a good relationship with your peers always, as much as you can. Like, it doesn't matter if they're under you or above you. Like, that is super important, because you don't know, like, when someone that has been under you is gonna get you your next job. And I say that from experience. So that is super, super important.
Yeah, Joe, you specifically mentioned that for you, attitude, meaning like a positive attitude, is more important than your actual talent or skills, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've seen it time and time again. Like, making games is just really hard. I mean, the bottom line is, like you said, you'll stress and, spend months, years working on something, won't be a hit. You'll have to turn around and do it again. There can be long hours. Like, it's very challenging. Our industry changes a lot. Standards change, practices change, platforms change. And so I think it's just you have to be positive. You always have to kind of look at what you're doing and look at the challenges, and I think the biggest thing is with other people too, is like if you're negative and you're on a team and you're sitting there, like you're going to influence people, and you're going to influence a lot more people, unfortunately, than the positive person influences.
Yeah, but how do you? My question is, okay, so all this stuff seems kind of obvious, right? If we look at it like this, not that it's not interesting, but how do you convey this stuff, right? How do you convey in an interview or in a cover letter that you are a good collaborator? Is it just mentioning it so people say, oh, at least they know that this is something that's important to mention? How does someone, an individual, convey during an interview or writing a letter or resume the idea that they're a positive collaborator? Because that's a situation that you're in when you're trying to break into the industry.
I mean, I think one way is through team projects. I mean, that's certainly important. I think someone who comes and says, well, I mean, it's tough to know. I mean, if someone came and had an amazing project they did all by themselves, like maybe that would be cool. But at the same time, if they have a correspondingly better project they did with peers, and it showed how they work together on it. I mean, those are a lot of questions that I ask. Primarily in an interview, we'll look at work that you did, and then we'll dig into it. Like, how did you work on this? What were the challenges you dealt with? And the more you talk about the way that you and your peers, work together to solve these problems, is going to look good.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd say you just reminded me. A lot of this is not resume, cover letter. A lot of this is interview. You can write down, I guess, that you're a positive collaborator who gives feedback, and that's fine. But I would say that the number one thing that we've seen in people coming to interview is who you talk about and how you talk about them. And people, I mean, you would be amazed at, I'd be sitting in an interview and the person will be like just talking trash about somebody, and they'll feel like they're validated. They're like, oh, this person was dumb, or they did this, or they didn't do this, or they impacted me. And it's all about like the other person. And it's just like, wow, like, it's like, yeah, you could have the worst experience ever, but like, don't bring that into an interview. It's like, you should always, find positive things to talk about. You should
And
always.
the reason why, just to clarify, the reason why is because then you think, oh, well, there's someone who's just going to blame other people on a day-to-day basis.
Because it's like, I mean, even though you're putting your best foot forward in an interview, whether you consciously are doing it or not. And so if you're putting forward a negative, sort of vibe in an interview, how much worse are you going to be as an employee working in a team? And so, it's kind of like the standard is the interview is like the best we'll probably ever see of somebody. And so if that's not that good, then, they're probably not going to get better.
So this is all, I guess, what we sometimes call soft skills or social skills or attitude-based things. Again, are they, beyond just being a collaborator, is there any advice from you guys about how you can convey this, how you can, other than just bringing it up or mentioning it in a letter, how do you end up seeing this in a candidate or a teammate?
I see it like, I assume you guys all have school projects, but a lot of game jams, that's how I conveyed it, like, because I didn't go to school for games, but I go to Global Game Jam, and I put those projects on my resume to show that I've done at least some little sliver of game development process. So yeah, and I always worked on big teams at game jams.
Cool.
So I might jump in on passionate, because I think that's like, I also consider that really important within the team, and I think game jams is great for that. If I see that you go out of your way to use your own time to make games with friends or with anybody or by yourself, that's going to speak a lot to the degree to which you're going to bring passion to your work.
And it doesn't even have to be in-person game jams. Like, I've run game jams on itch.io, and you can do like Ludum Dare and stuff.
It's true. I remember, I hired people for many years running my own studio. Someone says, oh, well, I've been out of work for the last year. And then you say, oh, well, what have you been working on? And they say, well, I haven't really made any games. And you're like, really? You want this to be your life? There's lots of people that would love to be a game developer, and you haven't even have some little card game side project you've been working on. So that's one way you can show passion, right, through personal projects.
And I'd say a lot of times people come into interviews with lack of specifics. Like, they'll say, oh, I'm a positive person, or I'm a collaborator, or that, and then you'll be like, well, give me an example, like, or talk me through something, and then they'll be like, well, you can tell that it's not top of mind. And I'd say, like, all these things, be prepared to kind of name an example, and it doesn't even need to be in games. Like, a lot of these skills are, wherever you work. Like, these are just important skills to have.
Yeah, I see the word passion in cover letters, and it's just kind of like my eyes glaze over. If you are passionate,
right? Yeah,
show me.
That's the paradox, right? I mean, you all want to see this stuff, but how do you? Maybe I keep on asking the same question over and over, but how do you Like, yes,
I can tell if you're passionate if I see like blog posts, like or stuff, or the projects, or showing what you do. I don't need to be told.
Show, don't tell, right?
Yeah, and I mean passion, and to me, it's an emotion, and so emotional things conveyed in writing, unless you're a really good writer, probably not going to come across very well. Like I've seen really wacky cover letters and resumes that people think that they're being, cute or cool or whatever, and it just comes across like really bad. So I'd keep it pretty even.
All right. Any other comments on these?
Yeah, actually, just one
Yeah,
more.
yeah.
The give and receive feedback. So like really, really underrated, and something that I think is the root cause of a lot of issues with, people talk about generic communication problems and everything. And what we see is typically somebody did something that didn't meet somebody else's expectation, and that person didn't communicate back to the other person in the correct way. And so that's how people get offended. That's how like office politics starts. That's how people get written up. So I feel like the ability to understand that, critique is not necessarily like criticism, and the how you say something is oftentimes like 100 times more important than what you're actually saying. Because if you're saying something and you're saying it like in an attacking way, people might not receive it, and so it's pointless, and then people might be like, wow, that person's a jerk.
Yeah, actually, as a lead or someone who has led teams, especially of new people, I would give them feedback on like how to do bug reports, how to like try to anticipate what the devs would want. And it would be really great when I'd see them developing and like remember that and do that in the future. It was a problem when I had to repeat the criticism and come back and tell them over and over again, like, no, actually, you should have done it for these reasons. And it's not sticking.
I love what you're saying, because all of my students know I really talk about giving and receiving criticism as a super important part of being a designer and showing respect to other designers and becoming a better person.
Yeah, and I mean, allow them. I think the biggest, just to kind of jump off that, is allow them to solve the problem. Like if you have an idea, it's way better for you to kind of present your hypothesis and then allow them to respond, so they don't feel like you're imposing something on them, of being like, hey, like, here's my thoughts, here's some of my, my experience with this, and what do you think? Like the what do you think is like the single best line that like you would ever learn, in the professional workplace, and just feel free to use it a lot.
Let's move on. But I do think able to give and receive feedback and all the things in this list is almost more like a skill rather than the personality. It almost ended up in this list, and I think there's a lot to talk about here in terms of what are the right skills. I know it's hard to generalize across different, being a visual designer, programmer, producer, but there were some things that I found that I could generalize from what you said. And again, there was really a lot of agreement here. So these were the three big things. And I think what's interesting is that number one and number two kind of are flip sides of the same thing, right? A lot of you said you're really looking for talent and experience, technical skills, understand the fundamentals of your discipline, go deep in something, but then also some of you said that it's really important to be a broad thinker and to be able to think like a designer, even if you're not a designer. I think, Shervin, you mentioned soft skills being important, for example. And then communication, which really ties into what we were just saying about giving and receiving feedback. It's really important. Do any of you want to talk about this? I think also I just want to highlight this because I think when you're in school, this is a huge thing that students think about, right? What's the best way to prepare myself? There's always a debate. Do I, for example, go really deep in one narrow thing? Do I try and broaden my skills? Does everyone need to be technical, for example? Or can I come in with sort of like, I'm a designer, producer, know a little bit of audio, and I know it depends on where you work. The bigger the company, the more specialized in general the role. But I think it's a really important issue, and I'd love for you guys to give feedback on them. This is actually your chance to help prepare a generation of people coming out of school. What would you want them to think about as they're choosing their classes and deciding what kind of projects to work on and what kind of skills to refine? So I'll throw it open to the panel.
I mean, I'd say games are design. I mean, at the bottom line, like you can make a tech demo as an engineer, you can draw pictures as an artist, but like you can't make a game unless there's an actual game design. And so I think that's why design thinking or some design sensibility, familiarity with games is important for all disciplines, because like you're all making games, and even if that's not your primary job as an engineer, for example, like the best engineers that we have are able to take a spec from a designer and not just like implement the spec verbatim word for word, but look at it and be like, oh, like make little tweaks to something, because they know, they play games, they know that those things that the designer might have missed in the spec are going to be important, and I think that, that's, same true for artists. Like everybody's also playing the game, or should be playing the game, and so like getting the feedback from the entire office is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're at a game design school, I mean, like game development school, you probably are embodying this, but on medium and small size teams, things are very fluid. Game programmers are going to make a lot of design decisions, even if nobody quite knows it. Like when you're balancing some small thing, you're deciding how some sort of effect is going to happen, you're making a design decision. And when I'm choosing between hiring developers, if you get a developer who doesn't have design sensibility, they will make the wrong decision at that point that you didn't even know was a decision, but they'll make the wrong one, and then you'll have to realize it was the wrong decision and fix it. But if you get a developer who has design sensibility, all those teeny little decisions they make are going to actually be the right decision, and then you don't even notice that they happened.
Yeah, I think that's good. You and Tom, you and Joe seem to be really in agreement. Amanda, were you going to weigh in on that too?
I don't know if English is the right answer because I'm a classical studies major, so I didn't take English. But communication, as far as I know, I see a lot of, especially my friends in the games academia, like their papers or something will be written in a certain way that academia expects of you. But when you're working as a developer and you want to communicate stuff to the other team or writing bugs, you want to really keep it very simple and describe it very carefully. And I always recommend the book William Zinsser's On Writing Well to like my new testers, because it basically taught me to self-edit, and it really talked about like even scientific writers writing things that can be understood by layman's, because your bugs and specs will be going to like artists or off-site team people, or you might even be writing like marketing copy and stuff people outside will see. So you want to be able to show that you can like take your idea and make it very
And Amanda,
tight.
you really did emphasize communication a lot in your responses. For you, that's not just written; it's also verbal. It's also social communication, or mostly
verbal
written?
definitely helps. Like I totally understand if it's your first interview game job, like you might start rambling or slurring and stuff. Like I've seen that, but I kind of know how to ease people into
Slurring,
it. And
showing up drunk and slurring.
not even slurring up. Like having the verbal tics will start really heavy, and then I notice them start tapering off as I get someone more comfortable in the subjects they like. Being a good interviewer is like learning how to navigate that and dig into like, oh, this is obviously your topic that you like. I'm gonna get you start talking on that and seeing if you can explain to me. Like we would always like to ask new testers like, oh, what are you playing right now? Have you noticed any issues while you're playing that? Because we don't want to ask like, oh, did you just play League of Legends? Like, did you notice this bug with this champion? Like that's not gonna get you an answer, but trying to pull them out and have them explain something to me who I might not even be familiar with it, but if you explain a system to me, I can understand it.
I think also communication is so important. I think we'd all agree that that's why, you always have to imagine when you're writing to a game company without knowing anybody there, there's some huge stack of resumes and cover letters or this inbox that's coming in with dozens of emails. If you're sending in a poorly written letter, a resume that is really poorly visually designed, it's just going to get thrown out. They're just looking for how can we narrow this down from 100 people to a dozen people. And so communication often is part of that first filter,
and
right?
one thing, if you're creating like a mass cover letter to send to like 30 companies, like I have gotten so many like resumes and cover letters addressed to like Irrational or like Riot, and it's just like, dear hiring manager at Riot Games, and it's like, okay, like you obviously didn't care enough to like even edit your cover letter. And I know it's obvious, I hope it's not intentional, but like, I think that like just make sure that every resume you send, like you might be tempted to just kind of spam it out, but like there's a lot of very unique things. Like when for example, when I read a cover letter, it's like people who are familiar with your games, like who have actually played your games, who like understand maybe why, your philosophy, like why you make the games you make, like experiences you had with the games, like things that are kind of personal touch, because like what happens generally is HR or a GM or somebody, a lead is going to skim, and they're going to skim, they're going to give you have maybe 3 to 5 seconds, and so you just want words and phrases and things in there that's going to make them give your cover letter 30 seconds. And then from the 30 seconds, hopefully then, they'll kind of look at your resume.
Yeah, actually hold that thought. We're going to get there because the next slide has that as a really important bullet point. But before we leave this, I want to ask our recent graduates, Shervin and Maria, go back to this core issue about skills, skill building. What should people study? Let me ask you guys one question. what was the most surprising thing to you about going into school, graduating? You both were in school a couple years ago. Graduating, what was one surprising thing? Either something that you thought would be you weren't sure if it was useful and it ended up being central, or the opposite, something that you thought, oh, I needed to take this class, but once you got to the industry, you realized, oh, it's not that useful. So were there any surprises for you that can help shape their thinking in terms of classes that they should take?
I mean, more than a surprise, just something that has been developing is, for me, has always been super useful having a hard skill. I'm a game designer, and I've always enjoyed doing game design thinking more than like artist. I have a background as an artist, but I found it extremely useful to have a hard skill that it's completely applicable to games, because that allows me to start.
And what hard skill are you talking about for you?
Illustration and drawing and 3D
Illustration
art,
and graphic design. Right.
You know, being able to art direct a game, to know like exactly what I want to, you know.
You want to be a double threat, not just a single skilled person, is sort of what you're saying.
It's not that I want to be, it's something I've started doing out of necessity to, started to get freelance jobs. It's always been easier for me to find them as an artist. But I found that it's super important, especially for game designers, to have a hard skill, like essentially boils down to art or code, unfortunately, and code is usually more important than that for game designers. I see more game designers that know how to code. So that's always going to be useful, and it's always going to open up doors and help you like find more jobs than if you are solely a game designer.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think of the 5 designers we have on our project, all of them have a traditional hard skill. Either it's level design, UI art, or coding. None of them is just a straight designer that doesn't come in with any of those skills. I mean, it's hard for me because my job is being both a programmer and a designer at the same time. So I don't even know how you could do it without having both. But if I had to pick, I mean, programming is definitely the deeper tree that I'm in, just because I've done it for longer.
Was there anything, though, so getting back to the question, anything surprising or interesting about your education, or maybe this was it, you realized that for you really need a mix of skills and not just to be a game designer?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that surprised me after hearing about how our interviews before me and then the interviews after me had gone was how much design thinking was lacking, I guess, in those interviews. Something, people would prototype a game, and then when the lead designer would poke them about why they made the design decisions they made, they just did it for the sake of doing it.
So you two are kind of on opposite sides, right? Maria, you're a game designer who also has this back pocket of visual design skills, and Shervin, you're a programmer who happened to be really good with design thinking, at least from the people hiring you from their point of view, and that made you a better candidate.
Yeah, I mean, in my interview, I had both a lead programmer and a lead designer
Right.
who grilled me on both. So
Right.
it was you had to please them both if you wanted to get the job.
I would say I just want to expand a little bit on what they said, because I don't want you to think you only have to have visual design or coding as a strong suit in order to enter the industry, because you don't have to. I mean, just from my experience and from what some of the other panelists have said. But I do think that there's a lot of thought that I have good ideas, I can balance a card game, I know what an interface is, therefore I can just jump into the industry. In a lot of companies, being a game designer is being like the director of a film, right? You don't enter as a director of a film. You have to put in you learn editing, or you're doing post-production, or you're on set doing makeup, or whatever it is, right? And then you gradually learn about the industry. So I would think if game design is your main thing, that's great, but you should have think about other things. It could be coding or visual design. I would say it could also be you are very entrepreneurial. You can help with strategy, make pitch decks, and you're great at communicating ideas. It could be analytics. You are amazing with spreadsheets. You can balance numbers, economies, understand player behaviors. It could be that you write, not just that you like to tell stories, but that you're a really good writer. You can make large documents. You can edit copy on the fly. You can make really snappy stuff. Or that you're a great producer. You have experience working in game jams or a personal project with large groups of people, and you've really read about game development and production processes. So I think there's a lot of ways to have this second set of skills. But I think that is good advice in general.
So I want to add one thing.
Please.
Yeah, I do agree that every skill is important, but in the end of the day, you don't ship spreadsheets, you ship games. So you do need a skill that is applicable to making a game.
Well, there is a monetization designer.
They're at Dots.
Oh yeah, I mean, you could be like a math specialist. I like analytics. I just thought that made me think of one of my designers who's becoming a producer came through customer support, and what he did was he listened to lots and lots of complaints about lots of things and kept talking about the ways to design solutions to the problems that he's hearing. And over time, that like, those are some great ideas. We should pull you in as a game designer.
Yeah, I'd say one of the weirdest things in the last 2 years is like economists now. Like it's huge. Like it's probably the most in-demand job, especially out on the West Coast, because all the free-to-play games, like they're just, like balancing economies, especially when it's all microtransactions, is like really important. So.
Are you sure? Because I heard that you can't ship spreadsheets. That's just no. No, I think it's great. No, I know what you mean. Yeah, I know what you mean. And a lot of it.
This is a panel for getting started. Usually, it's easy to get started in small companies, and small companies need people that put things into the game.
That's really true.
I have for experience.
Yeah,
so
that's
you
a very
do
good
need
point.
something that will bring value to the game. Not like all of these things are super valuable, but you need to ship the game.
Right.
So you need other things.
And again, I think it's a function of the size of the company. I mean, Dots has how many? 40 people. So at 40 people, they can have a specialist,
Yep.
a monetization specialist, right? But at a 3 to 5 person studio, it's not going to be the case. So I think a lot of it's a kind of game in the size. All right, we're almost done here. The final set of things that we're looking
Can
for
I dig
is,
into one?
Yeah,
One
please.
last. The thing at the top there about go deep into your specialty. I think I said something very specific about this because I mentioned before that the industry changes. Like maybe every 2 years, there's like just a total revolution. It hasn't happened like over the last, like mobiles, at least in our space, is still like really big. But nonetheless, we'd look for somebody, especially in programming, who has fundamental skills. So recognize that the languages are going to change. Like every couple of years, it's going to be Unity now, but it's going to be something else, in 2 years. And so make sure to decouple your skills from the specific language that you're a master of.
yeah, you don't. People want to hire a programmer. They don't want to hire an expert in one thing, unless you're going to be a temporary freelance.
Yeah, just to jump on that really quickly, we've had applicants who have been too tied to the technology, and the challenge becomes that when they try to transition, especially even at our company, which a lot of the stuff is in-house, you can't learn it before you show up. So adaptability and understanding how to quickly learn something in a technical environment is like extremely important.
Excellent. That's a really good, maybe that should have been on the list, adaptability as well. Finally, someone that gets a big picture. So we've actually pretty much talked about some of these. I think we were talking about knowing your future employer, and actually most of you also mentioned this, that you should do some research. Joe, you mentioned this already, that you want to, in your cover letter, you want to demonstrate something specific about that company. You never want to send a generic cover letter to a company. And Amanda, you were about to add on to that. Do you remember what you were going to say?
No, but it's really
Sorry,
interesting
my
interviewing.
fault.
No, it's fine. It's really interesting interviewing people lately, especially on a game. Like when I'm interviewing Irrational, we kind of like, okay, have you played BioShock? Like at least get that. Make sure you have that. Like if you go to Riot, they're going to want you to play LOL. And then especially with the mobile game, I keep getting people applying and they hadn't played 2 Dots yet, and I'm like, it's right there in the store. It's literally free. So a little effort.
It's like we get the caveat sometimes. People are like, well, I haven't played, but I watched the video, and it's like, okay, so yeah.
I think it just goes into I think smaller game companies, especially you said if you're just starting in the industry, you might be interviewing a lot of small game companies. I think we're a little sensitive about whether or not you played our games, and so it really stands out. You're going to get the question, so what do you like? Which of one of our games have you played?
Right.
Like play something, play it a little bit deeply.
Actually, that's an incredibly common interview question, right? What did you like about our games? What did you have any criticism for us about any of our games, right? So that's a good thing.
Yeah, the one thing I'd also encourage people to do is to actually give valid criticism during your interview. My entire interview was spent criticizing Warframe with challenges that I felt like they were having, and they were incredibly appreciative, to say the least. And that doesn't mean you should go on a huge rant and completely shit on it, but I'm just saying
It's subtle. That was a bold move on your part, but obviously
no. And at the time, when I had finished the interview, I was talking to my girlfriend. I was like, either they love me or they hate me. It's one of the two. And it turned out that they were really happy with because I gave constructive feedback, and it's a good way of demonstrating the
Right.
previous skill, which is knowing how to give feedback
Right,
properly.
and also to be positive, can you give feedback and be positive?
Yeah, be ready for that because at my interview at Irrational, the director of Bioshock came in and he's like, "What do you hate about Bioshock?" And I had an answer ready.
Maria, you had a whole bunch of stuff under presenting yourself well. You talked about having good social media profiles, knowing how to highlight your abilities, having good portfolio with short statements. So
But it's funny because when I answered those, I was talking to my HR manager and I was like, oh, so like I'm doing this thing. And she's like, oh, what are you writing for the question? And I'm like, I'm writing these things. She said, oh, you have to put this and this and this and this. So everything I put is super important, which boils down basically to having a professional LinkedIn profile, having a good picture, not any weird pictures. He hates weird pictures.
Right.
Make your research. So if you're gonna apply to like Avalanche or Fifth Cell or whatever, just research who's the HR manager because it's right there in LinkedIn, and it's like appreciated to direct the cover letter to the person that's gonna be viewing it, even if you don't know. But she mentioned it, like she was very adamant about that. Cover letters are super important for her. And just like play the game. Just like as soon as if I ask a question and someone has not played the game, it's like, okay, well, I'm not gonna hire you.
Right.
Like clearly you don't care enough about.
well, this is a sobering thought, right? I mean, how many people are at Avalanche in the New York studio? About
under 100.
under 100, but not too far under 100. So the person reading that cover letter and resume isn't even a developer in that they're not directly a developer. They work at a game development company, but they're an HR manager.
Yeah.
So they're filtering, right? So
Yeah.
so that's
She's the first filter usually. So like.
But so fill in the blank. So then what is she looking for? I mean, what do you think beyond these things about presenting yourself well, no weird picture? Do you have anything to add? I mean, to the stuff that's been said about know the company.
I try to get her to tell me these things, but she was like, these little details drove her crazy. Like,
Okay.
if you don't get those right, you are definitely not getting anything.
And again, the details are
Good LinkedIn profile because you have social networks right now, and you have to be tending to that. Good picture. Good, like a description, address her, the letter, or the HR person, and get the sex right. She said that she got a ton of people addressing her as a male, like Mr. whatever, and she's like, clearly my picture is not that of a guy. Like I don't even call them back, So
okay. Those are all great tidbits.
Yeah.
I would get a lot of, especially like students who'd get a little overzealous and send me like 2-page resumes. And I'm like, need 1 page, please.
1-page resume. Okay.
Especially it conveys communication. Like if you can communicate what's important about you in 1 page, I'm really into it.
Right. I would have written you a 2-page letter, but I only had time to write a 5-page letter. Right.
Yeah.
I've gotten a 5-page letter.
Yeah.
I think when it's sort of as a counterpoint to that, I know that we've looked at if there's like a blue, like because we have like an online thing where people put in their things. If there's a blue portfolio link, even if it's like a super short, like a paragraph, like, hey, I'm interested in a job, like we've clicked the portfolio link because like it means so much to see what somebody did. If you're an artist, like putting that up front.
The
is
splash page of the portfolio is really important, right?
Yeah.
To sort of give a general sense. What's the first impression? Do they understand who you are as a designer from that?
Yeah, and I'd say, I don't think this fell into any of the categories, but talking about portfolios, usually when I do groups with students and stuff, like portfolio, like analyzing a portfolio, like somebody will go like, okay, like I want to show my transformation from, a high school student into an artist. And it's just like, but the problem is if somebody gives you 5 seconds and they go to your page and you have like the drawing you did your freshman year that you think, it's really special to you, they're just gonna be like, wow, this is bad. And there's a chance that they might not look at all the other stuff, which, might be buried under it. So your professional portfolio should always show your absolute best work. And you should have, not just your friends or people that kind of like you, should have people who will be very harsh on you to like look at it, and you should always be editing and moving your stuff, keeping it updated. But like portfolio is visually, especially for artists, is like you get if you hook people with that look, like it's a good chance you'll get an interview. But if not, then
it's really good advice. So it's like the version of the stack of resumes, right? Someone's going through 100 links. They're only going to look at your portfolio for a few seconds unless they see something they like in that first few seconds.
There's something someone told me once that it just stuck in my mind, which is like your portfolio is as good as your worst work.
The weakest link in the chain. Right. So let's move on. And finally, having a life outside games. Amanda, you mentioned this. Really happy to see that out there. So I think that, increasingly it sort of goes with the work-life issues. People are not expecting crunch. They're expecting creative people that like things outside of games. Did you want to talk about that at all?
Well, I mean, I got out of games for a year and a half. I've been working in enterprise software until I got this job, and I actually used that time to write freelance, like for Polygon and stuff, and then also, so that's not out of games, but I was exposing people to stuff that they wouldn't typically think of as games, like visual novels, and I started getting more into that. And I started going to indie comics festivals and started exploring that side of everything. And then now that I'm back into games, I'm thinking of like meshing all that, like the comics versus games in Toronto and stuff, and it's helped expand.
Right, and I think that's attractive to employers, right? To know someone who's connected to a local scene is going to bring those interests into the work that they do.
You were asking how to show examples of soft skills and stuff earlier. A couple of our applicants are like really into lacrosse, and obviously playing a team sport is a good example that you know how to deal with other people pretty well. Right. And it turns out like I'm a super into martial arts, and my boss was too, and that obviously makes it easier to interview with someone when you have a shared.
Right, but and again, sometimes it comes. I remember reading an essay about someone saying that they ended up hiring someone as a producer because they had a lot of experience in food service, waiting tables, dealing with customers, difficult customers, and they knew that they had people skills. Now, that's not necessarily what they would put at the top of their game dev resume, but it came out during the interview, and it was something it was a way that they could help demonstrate what they did. So often it's just a matter of framing what you've done in the past, thinking about your volunteer work, your game jam work. Does that end up conveying some of this stuff? I think it's just about framing what you've done before, knowing how to present that.
Yeah, well, a very common question is just what do you do outside of developing games? And answers range from I volunteer at a local animal rescue, or and like stuff like that that's actually like how you learn about people's soft skills. Like it's the stuff outside of the technical stuff that like those are the type of questions that you're going to get asked in an interview, and then those are your moments to say like, oh, like, I teach math or I tutor or something. And those are the type of things that people are actually looking for.
And I'd say too, and again, this kind of goes more to game designers, is like Miyamoto, for example, he always makes a big deal about how like his games are inspired by his life. And so I think that, being well-rounded and trying different things and, having interests and activities and hobbies, like it can make you a better game designer. And if you can connect sort of the things that you enjoy doing in life to your game designs, like I think that, would be a great point to bring up like in an interview.
That is a beautiful thought. So let's round out this panel by getting some lightning advice. So this means that I'm gonna put a topic up here, and I want each of you to just give your one best thought about it. Some of them we've talked about already, so if you want to reiterate something you said or add something new. So best advice for finding jobs. Where do you find jobs? Anybody? How do you actually find it? Where do you find the job ad?
Go to local IGDA meetups or any kind of in-person meeting where you get to kind of talk to people and talk to them and find out who's hiring. Because that's the fastest way that you're going to get your foot through the door when it comes to getting past HR.
Anyone else? Yep.
Send inquiry letters to companies you're interested in, even if there are not any positions open.
So just exploratory letters for companies you like. Yeah.
I would just reiterate the local, there's tons and tons of amazing groups that do things in New York, and we have people, like our developers love being at these events because they're a lot of fun and they're learning things, and it's a great place to meet. They'll often come back and be like, oh, I just met this person who's really great.
Cool.
I'd say real quick, make friends with people who professionally make games if you don't already have friends. I think that like a lot of times people think that, oh, I need to know the CEO or like the director or something important. But a lot of times, if you get to know somebody who probably isn't getting bombarded with, requests to, for advice on portfolio, like maybe a staff level person, sometimes that person could make an introduction, into the company if you develop the relationship.
Also, don't be afraid to make friends with people who aren't professional developers yet, because in 5 years you don't know where they'll be.
Oh, nice. Yeah, be good with your cohort. All right, resume and cover letters. We heard a lot about this already. Anything that we didn't bring up that you just want to throw out there? Anything for resume or cover letters? Best advice? No, we talked a lot about it. How about resumes? We didn't talk about resumes that much. What's a mark of a newbie resume? Keep it short, one page.
I said 1 page.
I always say, don't put your education first. That's always right. Less is more, fewer projects, smaller descriptions.
Objective is not a thing that you really need anymore. It's always cute when I see that. It's
Don't
like someone
put objective
copied a little template. It's
to
like,
become the game design. Yeah.
Don't get too fancy, like readability. Like have somebody look at it and you think you organized it in this really cool, unique way. It's like don't like make it super simple to understand.
Clarity.
Yeah, I mean, I basically what I said before, like portfolio work, like give me a link that I can click on that I can start seeing either like games you programmed, design specs you wrote, or art you created.
We also, I like to do the first impression test. We sometimes do this with resumes in our program when we're doing a workshop on them. Put a resume up and just ask people for their first impression. That's sometimes more important than the overall information. So you got to work on that.
And then
too.
real quick, if you're an engineer, video of what you've done. Do not paste code, because then
right.
HR, it's almost certain that the first person to look at your resume is not going to understand what you wrote.
Right.
So take a video of it.
You kind of transitioned up to the next one, portfolio. So often have a video. Not everyone has every platform or time to download and install some plugin in order to see your game. Anything else? We had great stuff on portfolios. Anything else?
Yeah, it goes back to, especially specifically with code, if I can't run it and then immediately take a look at what it is, most likely even our leads won't do the same either. They just don't have the time.
Anything else? How about portfolios that are not visual and not about code? How do you express that you're a producer or a designer?
Include design statements and write up and have them double checked by someone. I've had several people ask me if I had wrote everything in my portfolio. It's like some people actually did read through that, so that they know what you were trying to do with the game.
That's great. Yeah, great advice.
Yeah, interesting ideas. I mean, if you're a designer, I think that a lot of times it gets poo-pawed like, ideas are a dime a dozen. It's like they are, but interesting, unique ideas are not. And so if you can summarize a unique design idea that maybe you worked on, maybe you want to work on, and have it there, somebody that has made games will look at that and be like, wow, that's actually an interesting, unique idea.
any sort of Scrum certification looks impressive. I don't really know how you go about that if you're not already working at a company that's paying for it. But it's something that some people don't have, and they kind of just implement waterfall like Slapshod. And then also for production game jams, working on the game jams, they were always my pitches, so I ended up being pretty much the producer / artist / designer. So
Cool.
that would actually be good. Game jam games that you shipped. There's so many game jam games where you get to day 2 and there's nothing. You have to keep the scope small and ship a completable project and display that here's my project, here's our postmortem, stuff like that.
Interviews. Again, we went over this. Any final stuff on interviews? You're in the room with someone. What do you see that's bad? I mean, what do you see that's good? Any final advice on this?
I see people who don't understand how long it's going to take them to move up in the industry. We would always show the trick question, where do you see yourself in 5 months? And if they answered I'm going to go from being a contract tester to an assistant producer, and we're like, oh, really?
All right. So understanding the slow advancement, or you're in it for the long term.
I've had I remember good moments in interviews where me and the applicant get in conversations. I think it's a lot of what you're talking about, where they either had a design problem with their project and they brought it up and we talked about it, and there was that moment of collaborative, oh yeah, that's so cool, or do you see any problem with the work that we made? And they come up with something that's interesting and relevant, and then we have a conversation. So those moments are really positive.
So trying to find your way from the kind of formal question answer to engaging. So if you can connect with the interviewer, you're showing that you have good communication skills and you're a real person.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd say the interview, at least for us in our studio, the interview, if you've gotten to the interview phase where you're face to face, you're technically, artistically, creatively already passed. So it's not about continuing to sell yourself in that aspect. It's more about, I'm going to sit down with you for a half hour, 45 minutes, and what's the rapport? What do I get from you? How do you talk about people? How do you communicate? What's your, how do you think about problems? It's the time to sort of demonstrate your soft skills.
Great.
I would just say be honest about who you are and what you want as well, because the fit test is as much for you as it is for the company. And I know many of you said that talk about positive about your past experiences, but don't lie about it. If you had a negative experience, you need to be able to talk about it, but talk about it in a positive way. But don't lie about what you've been through and what your experience was.
Great. The final slide here is just a whole bunch of resources for places to. I don't know if some of these are still valid. Is there anything not on this list? I will add it right now as we're looking at it. Do any of you? Is there anything I've left off? Any of you can see anything? IGDA is on here, right? Oh, that's the top one. IGDA.org has this breaking in subsite. That's still up there, right, Jessica? Jessica, where are you? She's around. That's still up there, right? Breaking in.
I think so.
And then on Facebook, there's a whole bunch of stuff. IGDA is also, the NYC chapter is also on Facebook.
No, that's the old Facebook group, but there is a link to the new IGDA Facebook group on.
What is the URL? Let's correct it.
It doesn't have the short name, so it's like a long series of numbers.
Oh, all right. A long series of numbers. Okay. So,
You can sign up for the correct one.
okay. What's the web link for IGDA? It's igda.org/what?
Yeah, igda.org/NYC, and that has links to all of our stuff.
Awesome. Go there. Okay. What else? Is there anything else? Are there any groups that people here are part of? This is your chance to promote, and I see so many cameras.
BetaWorks does a lot of events.
BetaWorks?
Yeah, it's like a
Okay.
startup incubator.
Is that just betaworks.com? Do you know?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We have Women in Games group. We have a Facebook page and a LinkedIn
Wigi?
page.
WIGI?
Yeah, but it's Wiki NYC.
Why is this beer? I don't want that to happen. WIGINYC dot.
We don't have a web page. We have like a Facebook page, so you can look for that.
Facebook. Women in Games International, right?
New York City.
Awesome.
And playcrafting? I don't know if it's there.
it's play-
Playcrafting, NYC?
Yeah. All
We have
right.
Twitter. Oh yeah,
Okay.
Twitter's really good for meeting people and keeping up with people and seeing projects and sharing.
And now that we mentioned Twitter, please go back to 2 years worth of tweets. If you're an active tweeter or whatever, and look at them and be like, know that any HR manager is going to go through and look at those. So,
All right. We've got some more stuff on here. Anything else to add here?
Nothing. I'm wondering if you're going to talk about projects. I don't know if anybody else requests people, potential employees to do a project, like if they get a certain way into the hiring process.
Yeah.
We always do, like that's
I do a test.
Yeah, like an actual like a little prototype test or a
Right.
design test or an art test. And I think that's like a central part.
Yeah, learn Excel.
We do both coding and design tests, I believe.
Can you give us a sneak peek at what people should expect, or is that a secret?
The design test is done in person or via Skype, and you do it with another designer. So it's another way for us to kind of gauge how you'll work with other people. And the coding test is a take-home test. It's can you solve all these bugs, and let's just see what type of code you write.
Cool. I'm going to leave this up here. We're going to have a short Q&A session because I said this before. Jess Haskins, the co-chair of the IGDA New York City chapter, is going to come up. There's a whole set of rooms, discussions, panels. Our panelists are going to be available after this to talk about particular roles. But first, I just want to open it up. If there are any questions that you have, follow-up questions or want more detail on stuff, yes.
Hi, my name is Jenny, and I was wondering, for someone who is interested in working on their own, like side projects or personal projects, how do companies usually respond to this? Could you explain a bit about non-disclosure agreements? Is it very common for people to sign away their life? Or, is there like does this vary from company to company?
Excellent. So I think so. Thank you, Jenny. I think she means more non-compete. So if she's working on personal side projects, either they're in production or things that she wants to do, can she work full time at a company? How do people feel about that?
That's a great question, actually. It's an issue that we run into a lot. We at Fifth Cell encourage it, and so as long as you're
What do
not
you encourage? Personal projects, side projects.
Yeah, side projects. We think it's great, especially if you're not necessarily doing things that are fun for you in the moment at work. At least you can do side projects. I've seen people sued, like at other companies. Like it's something that's like a real big deal. I'd say you should ask about it. it depends on how bad you want the job, to be honest. Like there's some companies that I've seen them turn away top level candidates because the top level candidates wanted to work on their own stuff and they were just like, nope, no exceptions, no side projects. So the best you can do is ask.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's companies, I'd say 10% on one end that absolutely draconian, will never allow it. 10% on the other end that will like encourage it, love it. Like that's just part of their culture. Everyone else is kind of in the middle. There's varying degrees of like, don't use company assets. Like, what are you doing? Don't make a game that looks like our game. That's going to compete with our game.
That competes directly in terms of platform or audience. Yeah. But I think the most important advice is that Joe's giving is just clarify. Yeah. Clarify with an employer.
This was something, I actually had the exact same issue with my initial, when I was talking with my work, was that they had a non-compete clause. And this is actually something that you can like negotiate with people. Just because it's in legalese doesn't mean you can't argue against it. And with me personally, we were able to come to an agreement that made work. So
right. Don't bring it up in your cover letter, but once you get into the interview process, you can say there's another issue I want to, bring it in casually. Any other final thoughts on this?
Yeah,
one?
like big companies like 2K International, like they were like, oh, you should ask us, but they were never going to say yes. And then smaller companies, like even the contract language might be vague. It's like, oh, as long as it's not a conflict of interest. But so you might have to talk to them or work that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about a lot of companies I think Arkadium's in a little bit of a gray area on it, and we have a lot of people who love making games on the side, and I totally think that people who make games on the side, it's great for their skills, they're trying new things, it's really good. But at the same time, we have a very robust internal ideation process. Like anybody can submit games and people can get revenue shares based on their success. So you don't want, I generally don't want people making games who are generating additional money, like making money on the games they're making.
Great question. I saw any other hands? Yeah, in the back.
Actually, an additional answer to that last question. Some companies will permit employees to work on side projects, but with the caveat that the company gets first pass at buying the intellectual property. And in cases where a company takes a look at somebody's side project and says, nah, not interested, then the employee can do whatever.
So that's another interesting scenario. Great, thank you for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering what recommendations you have for game composers who are trying to break into the industry.
Game composers, audio designers. We haven't talked about audio that much. Any specific? How many of you on stage have dedicated audio people internal to your company?
Just
okay,
one.
that's a good sign. Go ahead, Joe.
I just hug you out of sympathy. It's hard. I get more audio resumes, I think, than any other discipline, and I'd say it's close to all disciplines combined. Like, it's just something about audio that people love. My recommendation, portfolio times like 1,000 is going to be really important. Real short snippets of very memorable, great stuff. Scoring popular games, and then rescoring till they're super professional.
Right.
It's portfolio contract. I think a lot of times there's a lot of opportunity on very small scales to build your portfolio on a contract basis. So not necessarily being like, I need an entry level audio design position, and just be willing to do. You'll have to do more than any other entry level position in terms of like, you talk about building demos and stuff like that. Like people could ask you to score them something, and you might have to do it because that's just the level.
But I would also say, think about Maria's. Be a Maria. Be a double threat. Right. That's another way to do with audio. Is there some other skill set you can develop?
Audio engineering. So audio engineers, if you are technically minded and you can implement the sound effects that you make, it'll quadruple the chances of getting in. So, yep.
Any other quick advice for audio?
Yeah, so when I did Global Game Jam at MIT like 5 years ago, the audio people were like so rare, and we ended up not being able to split them into teams, but they made their own little team, and we would sort of like outsource to them. Like all the projects would work with them, and they were also really good. So they could do the music, they could also do sound design. Like our audio guys, they do all our sound design, so sound effects, little jingles, music, all that stuff. So as long as you understand, you can be like a composer and a sound designer. And at Irrational, we had like genius sound designers, but our composer was outsourced. But the other sound designers that worked in house, they could do like smaller stuff or work on those remix songs that we did.
And then, real quick, just do work for free too. There's so many indie little games out there that will never see the light of day, but you never know. And so helping them out, you get
So
your
that's
name.
being you, and you don't mean work for free for a big company. You mean
No, yeah, work for free for indies. Yeah,
Go
you
to
can't
these-
legally work for free for.
go to these meetups, meet
Yeah.
friends, collaborate as they're working for free.
Yeah,
on
and
their
also,
projects. Just want to clarify.
Yeah, and a lot of times people will try and like score. They'll present a one-sided AAA, like here's Arkham, here's my take on Arkham, and here's my take on Lord of the Rings, like my epic score. And it's like most games and opportunities are mobile and PC, and so like do something really interesting, do something quirky, have a good melody, like be able to use different instrument sets, like that's important too.
Let's move on. I love these questions because they are about things completely different than what we discussed. So let's say that. Does anyone have any really new and different topics that we haven't discussed? No. Okay, man. I've set the bar too high. Saw a couple hands go down. Yeah, in the back. You had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, so you guys talked about building up a portfolio, sharing them through YouTube videos and such, maybe, if that's the best way to show it off. Would you prefer to see in an applicant like one robust project that maybe shows that you're capable of coding several different new concepts or features, or would you rather see several smaller projects that maybe handle something that's not really groundbreaking but show that you can finish something?
I mean, I'd say as a coder, it matters the systems that you did, not necessarily like the product. I think coders are probably the least accountable to the actual games that they make, whereas a designer lives or dies by like how well the game does, how fun it is. An artist, how it looks, very apparent. But as an engineer, like you could do something super cool in a game that's terrible. And so, I think that isolating out the bits and pieces of the things that you actually worked on that you thought were interesting, and then presenting those, whether they were from one project or multiple projects, I think is the way to go.
Being very clear about what you did and why it's a cool contribution even to a mediocre project.
Yeah, don't take a video. Like a lot of people sometimes will take a video of the game, like they'll like a walkthrough or something, and it's like, well, what did you do? Like this is a video of the game, like not necessarily what you did on the game. So
I'd agree with that. Just the one thing to always remember is, and this is I've noticed at any studio or any programmer I talk to, programmer art is like a constant joke among any studio that like you can, if you're a programmer and you ship, for example, an A-star pathfinding algorithm. No one's going to judge the art of the algorithm itself, just how it works and how efficient it is. So you can do a lot of fun things with that and make things look really intentionally funny looking, and programmers will not judge. And if anything, they'll actually probably laugh because they're all really funny people anyway. So.
All right. There were some other hands. I apologize to you. We just have a lot. We have a very full evening. I'd like to do this. Is there anyone here who's specifically representing a company and you're here to meet people that are interested, that might have resumes or portfolios? Is there anyone in the audience who falls into that category? Can you come up if you're here from a company and you want to meet people? I just want you to show your face and introduce yourself so that after this people know who you are. You hopefully you won't. Sorry if you get mobbed. Anybody else in that situation? I know there are a lot of developers here that are going to be leading these roundtables. Okay, you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, sure. My name is Chris Casper, and this is Spencer Forrest. And we are here from a company called ID Tech. And what we do is we run summer programs. We run summer programs, 3 of them here at NYU, but at many locations around the United States and throughout New York that teach kids about video game design, computer science, a lot of different things, Arduino. And we're specifically looking for people that are game designers that are interested in spending the summer teaching kids about level design, coding in like Minecraft or Unity.
That would look good on a resume.
Yeah, exactly right. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we're here to talk to you if you want to come by and say hi.
Thanks. And so Jessica's going to come up and tell us what's up next.
Good. So we ended up setting everything up in this room over here. So there are signs up along this back wall over here. We'll have the resume and portfolio reviews. And then in the corner, mock interviews. And then the row that's up front here will be just for general like Q&A discussions, like roundtable type talk. We invite our panelists to come and have a seat here if you'd like to mingle and sort of continue the discussion afterwards. So yeah, also if I could have all of the volunteers who came out tonight come on up, you'll find spots with your name tags over here. Just grab a seat, and there's a sign-up sheet, and we'll start bringing people over to you. So there's a sign-up sheet next to each person. I'll be sort of conducting traffic. If you want to talk to like a QA person or a programming person, I can lead you over. Just write your name down, have a short 5-10 minute talk, and then we'll be cycling through.
Great. And before we do that, let's give a big round of applause to our 5 amazing panelists. Thank you so much.